Aim high, shoot far, aim for the moon. If you miss, you'll hit a star. Good evening and welcome to Better Together, sharing our lupus stories. It's your girl, Chanel Gabriel, your host this evening, and this is where we come to support each other through our lupus journeys. So you got to keep this locked. We're talking about a real hot topic today. Tonight's show is about what many of us have wondered, been misinformed maybe, or just genuinely curious to know. Is lupus genetic? Is it a genetic autoimmune disease? Will our children, grandchildren have to deal with this? Will they inherit that? Did I inherit my lupus? I mean, while nobody in my family has lupus as far as I know, who knows, right? It's a scary topic, fellow lupies, but listen, I'm with you. We're here with you. We're going to talk about this and we're going to leave no stone unturned, okay? So tonight on Better Together, we're going to get all the answers to your questions. We have a panel of medical experts, other lupies that can speak to the facts, the solutions, and possibly the hopeful expectations for our futures and future generations. So get ready. You see that chat right there. Make sure you put it in the chat, any questions you might have. And also feel free to be nice to the others that are here. Say hello, say where you're from. All right. Now I have to welcome my Better Together medical host, double board certified, got to put respect on it, internist, rheumatologist specializing in lupus, Dr. Michaela Baird is here. She's going to bring it all together for us. Dr. Michaela, welcome. Come on.
Hi, Chanel. Thanks again. So excited to host with you again. We had a little holiday break and we're back with exciting new topics. So genetics, it's a big question. We have some other experts who are going to help us out, actually a pediatric rheumatologist, but it's a big question because we're still learning a lot. We know some things about the genetics, but that's really not the whole story.
I mean, well, so Dr. Michaela, like according to the Lupus Foundation of America, they said that, and this is a quote, people of African, Asian, Pacific Island, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, or Native Hawaiian descent have a greater risk of developing lupus. And they say it might be related to its genes. And here in the US, communities of color, we know they have it higher and more severe disease activity, which may also be linked to social determinants of health like poverty or lack of access to healthcare. So we see all of that to say that there is something there within people of color. So based on this statement, us being at a greater risk for lupus, is this a particular like genetic concern for people of color? Is it often passed down?
Well, I think that when you think about race, it's, when we talk about race-based statistics, it's really loaded with a lot that we're missing and, just by substituting with the word race. So when we talk about social determinants of health and structural determinants of health, we're talking about how someone lives, where they work, what their exposures are in the environment, what their access is to care. And sometimes we can substitute that with race. So it is true that when we look at the prevalence or the people who are diagnosed with lupus, and this is looking at the US, we see higher numbers in the groups that you mentioned, up to 3 times more Black women or women who identify as African American, Caribbean American, Latinx are being diagnosed with lupus more than white women. But I think that what I'm saying is we really have to pay attention to all the other things that can come into play there, how these communities are able to access care, how they have access to physicians and like physicians, other physicians of color who they can communicate with. So it's a really loaded question, but the genetics piece, there is some truth to that. And we actually have some really amazing research being done that has begun to identify some genes that we can see are impacting how people come to get lupus. Now, the reality is that only makes up a small amount, which is why we're so interested in those social determinants of health and those structural determinants of health, because from the studies we have, take yourself, for example, Chanel, the data saying maybe you could have a parent or a sibling or a child, about 10 to 20% chance of having been diagnosed with lupus or who will have lupus. But I have many patients who don't have close family members with lupus. So that's why this is so complicated, and we have to really make sure we're not just thinking about the genetics, but also the environmental impact.
Because I was gonna say I'm the lone wolf. Nobody else has even a chronic illness other than I think my sister has asthma. So this was very new for me. So just wondering, I think that that's a question. I mean, so I know that we know that it affects women more. Is that a genetic issue as well? Like why women get lupus more than men?
That's a great question. I think that we do know that hormones are the major factor in that. So hormones, like for women, estrogen, can play a major role in how our immune system learns, how our immune system learns to regulate itself, and can play a role potentially in our immune system becoming overactive, like we see in lupus. And of course, that's a huge simplification, but hormones do play a role.
Oh, I know me. Like for me, definitely when my cycle's about to start, my hormone, like everything goes haywire, including my lupus. So I can imagine that makes so much sense. So and also thinking about like, is there medications? I'm sorry to drill you. I just kind of want to offset this before we bring our guests in some of these questions. But thinking about the medications we take in the BIPOC community, are those a factor? What am I taking in? What about nutrition? Are there things, any relationship between those things and genetics?
So you've heard me say this a million times. You know, lupus, this is so individualized, it's different for every person. But I think there is some truth to some medications if you have a diagnosis of lupus, that we think about and, are careful about because we know it can flare your symptoms. Sulfur-based drugs such as Bactrim, which is an antibiotic, that's something that we think about. And in terms of diet, we talked a little bit about diet, or actually a lot about diet with the lupus nutritionist. But again, it's individualized, but we do really want you to have a healthy diet, which means, for protecting your kidneys, watching your salt intake, for, protecting your immune system, trying to decrease inflammatory foods, so less processed foods, more whole grains, more fruits, more vegetables. So those are like broad things we can talk about. And that's pretty much true for many people. But I think when we're talking about lupus, it's hard to pinpoint yet, and hopefully research will take us there, what foods trigger new onset lupus. But I do think we have a little bit of a better idea about foods that can trigger flares. And those are pro-inflammatory foods like we spoke about with Dr. Freireich, which tend to be the processed and fatty foods.
Well, if you all out there did not see that, definitely make sure you go on blackdoctor.org, blackdoctor.org on YouTube or Facebook, or Better Together to get those links, bettertogether.com. So you can see that episode because it was really good. We had fruit and we had vegetables and we had little baskets, and the lupus nutritionist was super awesome and gave a lot of really good tips about just ways to think about that. But we're going to move into bringing some of our guests in. So our first lupus advocate is Alicia McLeish. She is a mother of two living with lupus. The two children are living with lupus as well. And she was diagnosed quite some time ago. And there's a little bit of story there that we're going to tease out a little bit. But welcome, Alicia. Lisa, well, your microphone is off. Can you please turn that on?
Thank you so much, Dr. Baird and Miss Gabrielle. It's a pleasure to be here to share my story.
Thank you. So we're so happy to have you here. Now, you were diagnosed not here in the States. You were diagnosed in Japan in 2004. That was the year I was diagnosed. Hey, I guess stands. But please, I'm just curious about that part about living in Japan, because I think it relates to something that you're going to talk about with your children. But
yes, so I grew up in Washington, D.C., in Southeast D.C., and throughout my teenage years, and even when I was younger than that, I had problems with losing hair, getting the bruises, getting the butterfly rashes, so forth and so on. when I went to Japan, and I moved there, I was about 32 years old, and I told the doctor what I thought, and they ran the ANA test and some other markers right away. Um, I know that because of where I grew up, the access to healthcare was very limited, and maybe they weren't able or didn't know, wasn't conscious about the disease. But for some reason, the Asian population was, and thank God I was able to be diagnosed. And so, with that being said, my son was already 8 years old, and my daughter was 5 years old. Um, I wouldn't say that you need to have your children tested right away, but they did that for me because of my diagnosis and because I was adopted and didn't know my medical history. Now, along with the lupus, I have fibromyalgia, alopecia, and high blood pressure. Um, my children suffer from asthma, uh, alopecia, and also high blood pressure.
Mm. So we see some hereditary signs and markers there and things. And I think that that's really important. I don't know if everyone, when they're as somebody that is adopted, I was lucky enough to still connect to my mom. I was adopted as well within the family. But definitely like having that information can really, I can imagine that being really helpful. But, you have two children and they're living with lupus. Was there a moment when you were thinking about where you, oh, let me get my words right. Now that you were talking about living in Japan and living with lupus, with that, you mentioned some of the details when we talked on the side, that there was a difference in when they were there than when they came back here.
Yes. So, thankfully, they are both, especially, well, my son is in remission.
Oh,
So thankfully for that. He's 32 and he has a son that turned 6 yesterday. I'm not going to tell him that he should get Julian tested, but I think he knows the signs to watch out for. And that's why I got my children tested, because they were having some of the same symptoms that I had when I was growing up. I'm sorry, Chanel, what was your question? Did I answer?
Oh, no, I was saying, you said that there was something different about like when you brought them there versus here. In Japan, not only healthcare, but there was something else that was a little unique that you noticed.
Yes. So another thing that was unique was, like you were mentioning earlier, the diet. The Asian diet is very different than us, right? And so they have McDonald's over there. We have McDonald's here. There's less salt in their food there. And when you're there, you have a work-life balance. See, that's the key. You have a work-life balance where you go to work 8 to 5 or whatever that is, and you come home and you cook and this, that, and the other. It's not like, oh, I'm supposed to be at work and I'm here, 10 hours, 8 hours. But you have that work-life balance and you have that time to cook a healthy meal, and mostly being vegetables, fish, and you're not focused, or chicken, and you're not focused on beef or other things like that, and you're not focused on salt. So that was a major difference.
I've seen that going in other places, eating things that I've eaten here and had it over there. And it's like, no, like I'll say this, KFC in Trinidad is very different than KFC in America.
Yes. I cannot eat KFC in America. Exactly. Yes.
But that's interesting. That's an interesting factor. And I guess one other question for you, just in living with, having your young people, your youth, your children, living with lupus. What is the benefit of you being able to have gone through this? Like, how do you see yourself really supporting the your children while living with lupus?
So I'm able to know and discern when they are having a flare, when they can't even detect it. And then sharing with them what to do as far as eating, what to do as far as taking a nap, and what to do as far as daily life, like really focusing on that work-life balance. So because I went through it, I'm able to share that with them. And I think that's why um, they handled it a little bit better than I do. I'm not in remission. It's okay. When I moved back to the States, I was on two medications, two medications. And then when I got back to the States, they put me on 8 medications. And so I've changed my rheumatologist because I knew that I didn't need to go through all of that.
All right. Well, we always believe in one teaching patient advocacy, self-advocacy. So I appreciate you saying that. And it's so important. And we have another guest that I'm going to bring in here. And thank you so much for sharing your story and also your experience as a person living with lupus, but also as a parent. I think that, the fact that so many of us were misinformed and told that because we had lupus, we shouldn't even think about genetics because we weren't going to be able to have kids. Those are things that people have perpetuated. And for many people that I've come across that have lupus. And so, you being able to speak to living with it and having children as well.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I had 2 miscarriages and 1 ectopic pregnancy before having my daughter. So my daughter and my son are 8 years apart. People ask me, do I regret having children and going through that battle? Absolutely not. I would do it all over again. They're great citizens. They're great people. And I love them to death. And it was just, I can't say enough. I was maybe 4 centimeters dilated with my daughter and didn't know I had the problem. So, but that being said, the choice is for everyone to do and decide if they want to have children. But I would do it all over again.
Oh, no, somebody needed to hear that. Okay. I appreciate you. And hey, mama is fly. I love your glasses. So with that, we're going to bring in Dr. Alicia. We have Alicia Akinsete, a pediatric rheumatologist. She is also a colleague of Dr. Michaela Baird here and a proud lupus warrior. So I love me a doctor that knows my battle, that goes through the struggle in the trenches with us. So welcome to the stage. Welcome to the virtual stage, Dr. Alicia Akinsete.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet everyone on the platform. And so, Elisa, it was really good to hear your story, and I like that immediately you said I wouldn't recommend to get tested because it's true. I don't want everyone to jump on to think that all of a sudden if you have lupus that your kid needs to get tested. One of the main things is if they're having symptoms, then get tested. I just wanted to point that out.
No, that's period. Thank you.
Exactly. Don't worry about it until you have to worry about it. Let them live their normal life, because there's certain family members that, I have lupus, and they immediately start restricting the child, and they don't even have any clue if the child has lupus. So I just wanted to put that out there. Let them live their normal life until they have symptoms. So.
Thank you. No, thank you for coming out swinging. You're like, hold on, let me just make sure we let everybody know and re-emphasize that point. That's so important. And I mean, you and Dr. Michaela, your specialties are the same. You're both rheumatologists, but how does it differ between the way that I know you complement each other because if you're a child, you move into adult, but is there a difference in your approach?
Our approach in diagnosis, we have the same criteria, right? But a lot of our kids end up having worse disease than adults when they're diagnosed. So a lot of them have way more kidney disease and other manifestations like kidney disease is way more common, anywhere between 20 to 80%. So that's something that we're always looking at. And then when they get sick, if you're looking at their disease activity, it is worse. So those are things, there are other systems that are more likely to be involved in kids. So we look at that and track that a little bit more closely compared to adults. So they have different things that they're looking at. They're looking at lipids and cholesterol. We're not checking those things in kids. But we end up being almost like the pediatrician to the kids because we see them so often. We're seeing them every 3 months. We become so involved in their care, and the pediatric approach, which I like a lot more. Like we check a lot of mental health. We are always asking about their school, and there's different things that we like about their development. So those are things that we take into consideration that an adult rheumatologist might not, just because that's what we're board certified in. She's a board certified internist. I'm a board certified pediatrician. So I think that there are different ways that we complement each other.
No, that's so helpful. Just that fact that you're also thinking about the wellness. And I don't know, maybe I know Dr. Michaela is great at this and she understands this, but I do think there's some rheumatologists that do need to learn from you all and think about that as well. Think about the whole person. And just to chime back in, Elisa, I differentiate the two of you. I love it. We had a couple of weeks ago, we had another Chanel on. And so it's so much fun to have names that match and rhyme. And but Alicia, just thinking about you, what was that process like in taking your children to the doctor and things of that nature? Like was that a regular and did you teach them how to go on their own? I'm just curious about like as a parent.
As a parent, I took them. They were very young, and I saw the symptoms. But I did start to take them to the doctor and make them listen to the doctor and take notes about what was going on with their body. And the reason why I did that is because I told them, Mom might not always be here, knowing that you can get lupus nephritis or whatever. And you need to take and advocate for your own self as you become a young adult. And so I did that. And I'm happy that I did that because my daughter went to school in Rochester. And she grew up in Japan, speaking only Japanese and Chinese. So Japan and Singapore. And so when she went to school in Rochester, she went to a predominantly Caucasian school. That's the school that she picked, but she knew how to take care of herself. Now, one thing she was not good at is taking her own medicine on time. So I did have to do that. I did have to remind her that, are you getting a nap? Are you doing your homework? Are you taking your medicine? But she knew how to advocate for herself without me being there.
That's really good. And that's really good. I really feel like what we're doing and the way you're loving on your children are also things I'm like, can you remind me to take my medication? Because I know I forget. But it's really interesting to see like what it is to pass. You're passing on so much wisdom in general of young people having, teaching your children how to take care of themselves, but you're also teaching them like this, a step further of how you take care of yourself. And that's so important.
I think another thing is that because I'm so active with them, I am their caregiver, right? And you need to have somebody that supports you. And sometimes people look at you, they might look at me and say, oh, Elisa's not sick. Oh, but she is sick. And you just don't understand what I'm going through. Or you think I'm faking, or you think I'm lying. I've taught them that they know the resources, how to reach out for resources, and that I'm always there to make sure that if they have a question, I'm it. And, I've been married for 32 years. My husband understands, but sometimes still after 32 years, he still doesn't get it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh no, that's helpful to be able to speak to each other about that. So, and Dr. Alicia, so I learned a fun fact. Not fun, I think it's an interesting fact that you also are living with lupus as well.
Yes.
And you're in this role. And how do you see that, in the work that you get to do?
I mean, it's complete and utter empathy and understanding what my patients are going. I was diagnosed when I was 12, so. To understand what the 12-year-old is thinking, what's going on in their mind, and just making sure that I'm also, like Elisa was saying, making sure that I'm providing them with all the resources that I can. So one thing, resources that are important, that if, your child has lupus as a 504 plan, if they're going to college, making sure they're registered with the disability office. So that way, if they're absent or have something going on, they automatically, because we've had patients with professors that fail the child because they were admitted to the hospital. So I think like these things need to be in place beforehand. meaning, like if they're still in like elementary school, high school, making sure they have a 504 plan, and then making sure that they are registered with the disability office when they're in college. So that way, because someone, they don't care. They're ready to fail you in a second, and think that we're taking advantage. So I think that it's really important that not only do the patients advocate for themselves, but us as physicians advocate as much as we can for them. So that's why I came, to help other people like me.
No, thank you. And your story, you were diagnosed at 12. Can I ask, what was that experience like? And did you have support? Was it genetic for you? Did you have anyone else in your family that had lupus?
No, I ended up having an aunt later on with rheumatoid arthritis, but really no. So it was a long time. I always had like joint pains and swellings, but I played a lot of sports and no one said anything until one summer. That summer when I was 12, I ended up with a huge butterfly rash, and that's like the screaming marker. Anybody sees it, they know, okay, lupus. So there are other things that are more inconspicuous and difficult to diagnose, but that big butterfly rash is like in all the textbooks, and when you think of lupus, that's what you think of. So I think that's what made my diagnosis a little bit easier. But if I didn't have that rash and was having fevers and joint pain, they might have just ignored it and attributed again to my sports, or I had a viral illness and kept things going. So luckily I had a pediatrician that saw it and said, okay, yeah, and sent me to a rheumatologist.
Oh my.
Dr. Nsede, I want your pediatric perspective and your personal story perspective about, what should make people seek out seeing a pediatric rheumatologist.
Yeah. So on our end, what we really look for, it's kind of the same things that you look for. So let's say, we're talking about family. So let's say you're concerned that your child might have lupus, things that we ask for you to look out for: fever without any known cause. So fever without, having upper respiratory symptoms, or gastro, like diarrhea or things like that. We would say alopecia, rash, specifically photosensitive rash, other things, ulcers in the mouth. And then one that's like very specific that like if you see it, you may not see it, but if they have an ulcer on the top part of their palate, like that's not up here, that's typically not something that you would see with anything else. So it would make you think lupus. Joint pain, so but actual swelling of the joint, send them to a rheumatologist. Any other types of rashes, so like any other ulcers on your hands, those are also important. If you see that urine is frothy, that might be difficult to tell because you're not always looking. Fingers turning blue or purple in the cold. So those are really like the most important things. And then, besides kidney disease, that's really high in pediatrics, also neuropsychiatric lupus. So sometimes thinking of someone who all of a sudden becomes schizophrenic, or a new psychiatric diagnosis, not to say that immediately, usually most physicians rule out other things, but that's also one thing to consider. Stroke, things like that. So those are really the main things that, and weight loss, that if all of a sudden they're losing weight and they're eating, and they're eating normally, fatigue, those types of things, those are things that you should watch out for and then consider sending to us.
That's so important. And I think as we talk about genetics, everyone wants to know about what tests they should run, what they should know. But what Dr. Akinseti just broke down is what you need to be on the lookout for. It's better than any test we have, to screen for lupus, are those symptoms and being aware of them. And if you have lupus, letting your family members be aware of those symptoms as well. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
I just wanted to put up one more thing, because I know Elisa said this, that I think her child was diagnosed at 5. And so when you have multiple children that are being diagnosed at a young age, that's the only preface I have to that. So yes, don't get them tested unless they have symptoms, but if they are being, majority of your kids are being diagnosed, or there's a cousin also diagnosed very young, those are things that are because lupus in general, the normal lupus that you and I get, there are multiple genes that are involved. But the kids that are getting diagnosed like before the age of 5, they're at high risk of having like one gene that's just abnormal. And that's what's causing their lupus. And that's why you're seeing all these young kids having lupus. So that would be the only reason why I would say get genetic testing, because sometimes there are certain treatments that might help, or some labs may not even be helpful because of the actual gene deficit that they have. So I just wanted to put that in as a caveat. If they're very, very young and there's a whole bunch of family members that are getting diagnosed before like 5, that would be concerning.
And that's why we need pediatric rheumatologists. We need to find one like Dr. Goncetti if that is the case in your family.
No, definitely. And I think this is a really good transition to bringing in our next guest, Melissa Glass. Now, her family history of lupus, they have lupus symptoms, autoimmune disease. It's challenged her medical community in San Francisco, where she and most of her family have lived all their lives. So with her, we also have her joining chronic illness therapist, Francesca Owu. And we're just happy to have you both here. Welcome, Melissa and Francesca. Thank you so much for joining us together. We're a big, happy family today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So definitely excited to start talking to Melissa. Let's start really quickly with Francesca. What mental health issues come with an extensive history of having lupus in a family? Like, what are some things that we should be considering around mental health?
So when focusing on mental health when someone has a chronic illness like lupus, we want to look at symptoms of anxiety and also depression. So if anxiety is present, this is maybe if a child receives a diagnosis, they're having difficulty in the classroom setting. With depression, they're having difficulty sleeping, they're having difficulty interacting with other children, and they're having difficulty even being present within the home setting. And if we're looking at a parent that has a chronic illness and the child shares the chronic illness, sometimes the parent is sharing the same symptoms as the child. So it might be a little bit of a disconnect between parent and child. So much that's going on with.
I'm so sorry. Can you just speak up just a little bit because we can't really hear you as clearly? Just help a little bit louder.
So there's so much going on within the parental unit when the parent has a chronic illness and also when the child has a chronic illness. And if you have multiple children that have a chronic illness, that is an added stressor to the parents because you're not only keeping track of your own chronic illness, now you have to keep track of your child or your children's chronic illness as well, which can be very taxing on the parent. And if you are married, sometimes what the research states is that the woman is mainly the primary caregiver for the children who have the chronic illness. So a lot of times mothers would come into appointments and say that they need help, they want help. It's a lot of married single mothers that are asking for mental health assistance when caring for children who have chronic illnesses.
You said married single mothers. Woo, that's a word right there. No, seriously, the fact that women are the caregivers and that this disease tends to impact women. I mean, that's an issue across the board, whether children have lupus or not, but very specific. And I think you spoke to something about like triggers, thinking about that, like the idea of like, what does it feel like to see your symptoms manifested in your children as well, right? And I see Elisa is shaking her head, but just curious if, and I know Elisa and your daughter, you both see a therapist on a regular basis. How has that helped you?
It's helped me because all the time my husband doesn't get it, right? And then, of course, I have to deal with my children's illness. And then I have to be the person that works, the person that is looking like to the outside that I have everything together. So that's helps me. I take several medications for anxiety and depression. But I made the choice when we moved back to the United States in 2016 that I needed to see a therapist. For 12 years, I did not see a therapist, and I should have been seeing one. And my daughter made the decision on her own when Taraji P. Henson started talking about seeing therapy and starting her own nonprofit. My daughter made the decision to see a therapist.
I think this is such a key point because, we talk about how we need to access mental health in many communities, but especially in the lupus community. What was that decision point, besides just seeing someone famous or someone they looked up to, but like what more came into that decision?
I think for me, what came into my decision was me and my husband could not get along, right? I moved back. I didn't want to move back to the United States. He wanted to move back to the United States. My daughter was doing her senior year here, this, that, and the other. My son was having his first baby as a single father. And so I needed to have something. And then, to be honest with you, my daughter went on her first date and got raped. And so it took her a while to see someone, but she finally decided to see someone after she saw me go through the process for about 2 years.
Alicia, thank you for sharing this. I know that's something difficult to share. I wanted to take a moment to pull Melissa into the conversation, and just to let everyone know, if this is resonating with you or if you have something to share, please share your comments in the chat. We're here as a family and a community. But Melissa, can you tell us a little bit more about the history of lupus in your family?
Gosh. Yeah, so my sister April, who was going to join us today, but she's not. She was the first one diagnosed, and she was diagnosed in 1989 after the passing of her daughter, and she was sick as a child, and most doctors thought it was psychological. And I recall after her being diagnosed, I had questioned if, in fact, it was something that was hereditary. And then, then the doctor said no, because it was still an unknown disease. Not much was known about it. And then in my teenage years, I got pregnant with my son. I had him when I was 18. And during my pregnancy, I had complications. And I ended up having eclampsia, not preeclampsia. I had the full-blown eclampsia. So the full-blown seizures and everything. And my sister April had the same exact thing, having her daughter. So she delivered her daughter at 6 months. I had my son. I just turned 8 months. And I remember uh, after my son was born and everything, I would wake up with bruises on my body as if I was in a physical fight or something with someone. And then I would have my feet would really hurt so bad to just get out the bed in the morning just to touch the floor. And then I was having memory issues. Then I had dizziness. So I had all these different things going on with me, and I didn't understand what was happening. And so I was seeing this one physician assistant. Her name is Annette Barnes, and she's amazing. She's a Black lady. And I appreciated how she really listened to me and the steps she took to test me for lupus. And all the testing she did, my test results kept coming back negative. And then, since we're sensitive to the heat and sun, in 2011, I moved to Concord, um, over in the East Bay. And Concord gets really, really hot in the summertime. You're like the 90s, 100s. San Francisco doesn't get like that. Well, it was then I got real sick, very, very sick. And I went to the doctor. I was seeing this one African American doctor. He couldn't tell me what was wrong. I requested for him to give me authorization to go outside of my insurance to go see Dr. Newelt, who was currently seeing April, to get tested to see what was going on. I got that authorization. They ran the test, and it came back positive in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
From there, um, I was thrilled to finally have a diagnosis to know what was wrong with me so that I can get treatment. And then a month later, my mom was diagnosed. I immediately started treatment. I immediately started on chemo treatments. And then everything was good. It was stable for a minute. But one thing I noticed about my lupus condition, is that treatments, they don't work that long for me. Uh, so I get short relief for my treatments, if you will. And so I've practically, at this point, have tried every medication that there is available for lupus patients, with the exception of one that's been on the market not too long.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
I was going to say, it seems like so it was not even in a declining order, like the mother, and then it was the daughters, and then mom, and then everybody.
yeah,
So we see a lot of different
yeah.
kind of a different pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And did this? I'm curious. Did this really bring you all together in a different way to kind of help each other? Were you able to support each other? Did you see that, or what was that like when you all realized you had this?
Well, I can say yes and no. I was my sister's caregiver,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm her voice. And then, for my mom, when she was diagnosed, like we kind of suspected it was going to either be lupus or MS. That's the both that's in the family that the women are diagnosed with. I lost two aunts already to MS. I lost one about 2 months ago, and this is all on my mother's side of the family. And so my mom diagnosis was just like, okay, well, I look after my sister April. I had moved back with my parents. So I'm like, okay, then she and I can look out for one another, but I'll probably end up looking after her more than anything. So I started shadowing her to her appointments and so forth. So still to this day, I shadow her to her appointments along with another sister of mine as well, who we're waiting for her diagnosis, who also has it, her and her son. Um, but again, we're running into issues of dealing with biased doctors right now, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of frustrating. But I am not the person who sits and takes no for an answer. I'm going to keep going until I get my answer, until I find out what's wrong. So my new rheumatologist, after he told me recently that I had a severe case of fibromyalgia and gave me gabapentin, he told me to come back in several months to see him. So I was online the other day checking my medical chart, and I just was like, I'm gonna cancel this appointment. He's a waste of time, and he's a waste of my money. I'm not about to keep paying no copay and him getting money from my insurance company when he doesn't do a damn thing for me. He doesn't examine me. It's like they're scared to touch you, like if your skin is going to rub off on them or, something like that. And God knows I don't want my skin to rub off on him, or anything like that.
Well, listen, I'm so sorry. You had mentioned to me that you had really been advocating to find a better rheumatologist. And, I wonder, how you advocate for other people in your family. I know that there's a nephew potentially who has lupus.
My nephew who both, so my mother has it and his grandmother on his father's side has it.
Mm-hmm.
And then his mom, she has it. Like I said, it's a disease that's very hard to diagnose. It has to be fully active. So he and his mom have all the full symptoms. He has all the ulcers in the head, the extreme joint pain. His hands turn bloodshot red. He has GI issues, just like myself. Um, and so right now he was seeing this black dermatologist, and recently he just said, you know what? She acts like she's scared to touch me. I said, well, call her out on her stuff. Remind her of her skin tone. You know what I'm saying? I said, let her know about herself. Check her. And I told him, I said, let me come with you. I guarantee you're going to get answers. No, 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 no. And my sister told him, if you want answers, you really need to take Auntie with you. But he's adamant that he don't want to take me. And then my sister's parents.
I'm sorry to interrupt. When you go into appointments like with your mother, because she was diagnosed after you, or if you did go with your nephew, like what are things for our viewers, that can help them, that, you feel like give you a powerful voice when you go in?
Well, I would say to, walk in the doctor's office, first of all, with confidence, because you know your body. I don't care what my blood work just showed a month ago, and the doctor come back and tell me, oh, you don't have lupus, you have fibromyalgia. My body is telling me something different. You cannot dictate to me what's going on in my body. This is my body. And when I asked him to explain what was going on, he couldn't give me an answer. So in my mind, I just thought you dummy. Immediately, I just thought you just dumb. You just walk around with this white coat, but you don't know your front from your back.
You better
And
tell it.
so and I just tell people, like, walk in here, take a notepad with you, ask questions, demand answers. If you're not happy, you keep going to get answers. But something that has worked for me and my family is I'm a Yelper. It sounds crazy, but I go and Yelp. And that's how I find my doctors, because that's where people want to write their true, honest opinions.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate enough to find some fairly decent doctors through Yelp.
There's Yelp, there's ZocDoc, there's blackdoctors.org.
Well, unfortunately, we're limited to Black doctors out here, if you will, but
I mean, you're saying limited. The experience of a lot of different people is it's not that many.
Right, yeah.
So I think you really spoke to a lot of the issue around communication, and I think that's something that is a real issue. And I would like to bring Dr. Owen really quickly, just to ask, is that something that you're seeing with a lot of different people, that your patients? Are they having issues around communication? Are they having, as a therapist, are you teaching that? Is that something that you're hearing from folk that are living with lupus? Like, is this a struggle?
Oh, absolutely. Melissa said it plain and simple. Thank you very much. Are going to their doctor's appointments. Doctors will, to a certain extent, ignore them or speak over their heads. I'm very particular about, when you're going into the doctor's office, please have a notepad with you with questions, and also bring your support system, because sometimes as a patient, when you're sitting in front of the doctor, you might freeze. Or there's times when you're literally not, it's like an outer body experience, because something is wrong with you, and you're waiting for the doctor to say, oh, your test came back normal. Because you've seen more than likely more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 doctors in order to get an appropriate diagnosis. What you don't want to do is, the doctor will gaslight you. Some doctors will gaslight you, not all, but it's definitely important for you to be able to communicate. And if you feel that this is really fresh and an open wound for you, it's really important for you to bring a support system with you that can back you up in your appointments.
No, thank you. Oh, Alicia, go ahead. Sure.
So another thing is, I think the audience should know is that now that we have technology, right? When you're bringing your notes, take pictures of what's going on with your body, your bruises, your hair, your whatever. That will better help the doctor determine what you're going through, because all the time, by the time you get an appointment, this could have disappeared, and they don't believe you. So I think taking pictures is also good with journaling down what happened.
Or a live video of actually what's happening. You in the bathroom, if you say your hair is just coming out, show the video that your hair is falling out, or what have you. I will share a story with you guys real fast, though. My son, when he was 18, he was complaining of leg pain. And I was just hypothetically just fussing with him, like, you can be walking around with a blood clot or anything. I'm like, after school, you need to come right home, And he was at school. He's in college at the time, and I was working. And I got an emergency call that he went to get up from the desk to walk, and he couldn't walk. His leg had this significant amount of swelling throughout his leg. Two of his classmates carried him to the college doctor's office, and the doctor looked at him and told him, you need to get to the emergency room fast. And so he got there, and then I arrived, and I'm speaking to the doctor about, the family history and blood clot issues and different things. And God is so good. Kind of find out he had like 3 or 4 large clots traveling.
Wow.
Now, from what I understand, I've never dealt with clots, but my sister April has, and my aunt in Texas who has MS has. And so apparently, though, I guess I'm just like the clot carrier, if you will. So as of now, since he was 18, he has been on blood thinners, and he'll be on blood thinners for the rest of his life. But I'm always mindful of him when he tells me about joint pain and stuff, like going to the doctor, getting tested, being sure. He's a healthy guru. He loves to work out, eat healthy and different things, because like they say, a lot of our health issues start in our gut. And so, but I'm always just mindful and speaking to him about his health, his mental health, and just like overall, we have a very, very open relationship.
Melissa, you have so many family members who are lucky to have you as an advocate. And I wanted to pull in our pediatric rheumatologist to ask her about, how does advocacy look for patients in your office, and how do patients communicate well with you? Because it's a different story if a parent is speaking for their patient.
Yeah. So, parents, I think, are the biggest advocates for their for their kids. So I think that's a given. If anything, that's the one thing that I feel like internists say, like, how do you deal with the parents? Because parents will lay their life on the line for their kids. But one thing that we do want is that kids to be their own advocates. So we try really hard to, we start transitioning them as a transition process, starting around 13, where we really ask the parents to leave the rooms for specific questions, and really to give them the time to relate their concerns. And if we see that a parent is overpowering a conversation, sometimes we'll ask more so, hey, can you tell me in your own words how you're feeling, so that way they can advocate for themselves. Other things that we try to have them do, go to the support groups by themselves, so that way they can tell their stories to other patients, help other just help other patients with their stories. But other things that we also do, this is something newish that we've been doing with other patients, but even like a buddy system. So that way I can tell you what I've been through, for a new patient that's coming in. So like a buddy system to really help show them, the ropes. There's also Advocacy Day. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have, when it was virtual, it was a lot easier to bring along a patient, but sometimes we also bring a patient along, because those stories of patients are so impactful on the Hill. And then other things that we do are try and help them become leaders in these areas. So sometimes they could be ambassador for either the Arthritis Foundation or the Lupus Foundation. So whatever way we can push for them to advocate for themselves, we try as much as we can. And other ways, I always like doing this, put it in there, but also when kids, I feel like take a lot, we try to, if we can, if they have a little tiny spark of interest in medicine, we immediately try and push them and give them all the summer programs. We have a list of things for middle schoolers, for high schoolers, for college students, to help push them on their way. Because like myself, I was a lupus patient, and I understand and empathize the most and try to advocate as much as I can. And if there's someone else that can do that, later down the line, I think that is very important. So, really fostering, pushing them into medicine, whether it's nursing, physician, PA, whatever.
I love it. I love it. Future advocates, getting people started early. I love it all. This has been such a dynamic conversation. We've had so many different perspectives and voices. We want to pull in voices from our chat, and want to see if we had any questions in the chat.
Oh, I do have one question before we get to the chat, because I really did want to pull back, because Elisa, you actually began a nonprofit that really tries to support people living with lupus. I believe it's called Blossoming Butterfly Warriors. Please tell us about this.
So it's starting in Maryland, and I plan to take it globally, even internationally, hopefully to Africa in 2 years. But it's Blossoming Butterfly Warriors Incorporated. And it's not just for lupus patients. Initially, I was going to start it for lupus patients, but it's for anyone of color with an autoimmune disease. And what we will be doing is giving assistance with medication purchase, co-pays, child care, so that you can leave your child at a child care and facility, and you can go to the doctor and pay attention to your own health, and also transportation assistance. But in addition to that, we're going to do programming in the schools. And so the programming is going to be teaching children in elementary, middle, and high school about autoimmune diseases and how they can recognize symptoms in the children and then in their classmates, and then how they can understand that because they were at school every day and they didn't want to do their work, right, that they don't get a pass. But maybe John was out because he was sick, and that's why he gets a pass on his work. So
I love that. Love the idea of, I work in education, so I love the idea of educating young people around all of the different people that are around them and the battles that everybody's fighting. So I think that that's super important. And I have one for the from the chat. Just and this might be Dr. This might be Dr. Alicia. This might be some. How can someone find a support group? Where are resources around this?
So one of the things I always tell my patients is, especially because we're into social media, go on to Facebook. Facebook has so many support groups pertaining to whatever illness, African American women lupus. You can look that up on Facebook, and you can also go to the Lupus Foundation website as well and look for a local support group within your area. But it's definitely important to have individuals who understand what it is that you're going through, so you don't feel as if you're going through this journey alone.
No, thank you. And I think we started out talking about genetics and talking about hereditary lupus, and just curious about and this might be a doctor conversation. Why don't we know more about genetics or these things? I feel like this disease has been around for quite some time. This illness has been around for quite some time. What are the reasons why we don't know more about the genetics markers and things like that?
Well, Dr. U and I were talking about this. A big part is the research, but to do research, you need the funding. And I think Dr. U wanted to speak on this.
Yeah, so majority of my research throughout my doctoral program and after focused on sickle cell disease. So I was also looking at diseases that affect mainly African Americans. So lupus was one of them. So when I was looking at how much funding was supplied for sickle cell disease, lupus, as opposed to illnesses that affect mainly the white population, I noticed that Alzheimer's mainly affects the white males. So I was noticing that the funding that they received in 2017 was about 592,000 million, as opposed to lupus, which received 93 million. And in 2014, it was actually a little bit more than that. So the funding decreased for lupus between 2014 and 2017. I haven't looked up the most recent stats on that. The website is it's a bit much. It's a little overwhelming. It's disheartening as well when you look at illnesses like lupus and sickle cell disease, mainly illnesses that will affect the African American population, and how much funding we're not receiving as opposed to other illnesses.
Well, this is a heavy note to end on, but I think a note where we can think about how we can advocate for our community. Thank you for all the work all of you are already doing and for joining us. We love all of our viewers' input, and we just want to direct you again to optionsforlupus.com. Say thank you to our sponsor, Biogen, for making all of this happen, and hopefully see you all next week for an exciting episode or session where we talk about joint pain and stamina related to flares. So, Chanel, I'll have you close.
All right, this poem is a little bit wider around genetics, but it's just thinking about all of the things that we inherit from our family. From the womb, they say God knew me. He knew because he saw my mother, my mother's mother, my mother's mother's mother, that DNA, a rainbow of unforgotten pain and power, attitude and fortitude, fortifying who bloodline would determine the paranoia in every disciplinary sermon. See, my mother became her mother. So short-sighted to blame another victim for my own trauma, for the only love she knew was to offer me armor instead of her arms, ointment instead of anointing, heartache prepared me for heartbreak, words that stabbed so that one day I could absorb bullets. And isn't that still a mother's love? The swollen backside with the saying, if you don't learn, you're gonna feel. And the feeling is punishment. 3 generations sharing numbness, realizing, see, I'm an echo of my mother's unheard cries. Her mother's jaw clenched tight, generations taught to harden, to survive. Now I struggle with the direction of my resentment, knowing it wasn't my mother's intention to pass the flames on her tongue to the boiling in her blood, the pre-existing condition of dysfunction sometimes feeling like love. See, but what I know is that this gene stops with me, and doing self-surgery to change the trajectory of future legacies. I am planting the seeds now for who I want to be, the seeds for a new family tree. Thank you. See you all tomorrow, everyone. And make sure that you are all ready, not tomorrow, sorry, next week. And please have a final good night. Thank you so much once again to our sponsor, Biogen.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my journey.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.